So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency?
Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds unconstitutional, but why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing socio-economic issues that I would want to address with you.
In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bubb Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bubb Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
Independent Media presents Grenada's only source for independent, unbiased, and well-researched broadcast journalism. This is the Bubb Report with Dr. Kellon Bubb.
Last week, the National Democratic Congress, on the heels of the election of its new political leader, launched its slate of 7 candidates in the St. Patrick West Constituency, home to the former deputy political leader of the party, Joseph Andall, who also got the nod from his constituency branch to be the caretaker candidate for this seat, even after being a losing candidate in the last 2 elections. Conspicuously absent from this major event was Joseph Andell's successor as deputy political leader in the person of Adrian Thomas. When quizzed about the role of the deputy leader as an election candidate in the next elections, Deacon was quick to throw cold water on the question.
So, the answer to that is no.
Adrian Thomas's absence from this major party event raises some questions. For example, what is his future role in the organization, especially as the election season picks up steam? It raises other questions about morale and unity in the St. David constituency, now firmly planted in Mitchell's column as party leader and as caretaker candidate. But it also raises further questions about how these rifts will be managed before the next general elections and before major fissures turn into serious fault lines. The NDC's long-walked political competitiveness is, however, continuing apace. If Wednesday's initial high-profile launch is anything to go by, they are expected to pick up a post-launch momentum across the country as the candidates have created a national buzz in some quarters. Tevin Andrews, Claudette Joseph, and Joseph Andel are not new to competitive electoral politics, having contested elections on several occasions before. Karine James comes with some parliamentary experience, having been appointed a senator after the last election and before resigning her position in the Senate upon the ascension of Tobias Clement as leader of the opposition. She has also been an active member of the NDC's youth movement before the Deacon Mitchell era. Quincy Britton, Jonathan Lacrette, and political leader Deacon Mitchell are the newest faces to the party's slate of candidates, with backgrounds in community service education, and corporate law, respectively. On our Caretaker candidate series this week, we will sit with Joseph Andall, who is NDC's Caretaker candidate for the St. Patrick West Constituency, and one of the NDC 7 launched last week. The twice defeated candidate lost the last election to Anthony Boson by 53.79 percentage points in 2013 and by 56.72 percentage points in 2018. But if we go beyond the aggregate data and look at the granular data across the polling divisions in St. Patrick West, the NDC did in fact win polling divisions 2, 3, and 4, respectively, by comfortable margins in what has traditionally been NDC strongholds in the area. Areas such as Mount Craven, Mount Rodney, and Mount Rich in polling division 2, Snell Hall, Madays, and La Fortune in polling division 3, and the town of Sauterres in polling division 4. Suppose Andal can regain some ground in polling divisions R06 in the Fond area while maintaining his margin of victory in the safe NDC areas, it might be fair to surmise that he may make this constituency competitive again, as the NDC did back in 2003, especially as the NNP ceded ground to a newer and an untested candidate in the area. Of course, a lot of these candidates are new and are untested. Now, in the 2013 elections, former NDC candidate Joseph Gilbert lost the St. Patrick seat, the St. Patrick West seat that is, by only 55 votes. Also on our program, we will examine the details behind the latest amendment of the second schedule of the St. George's University Act, Cap 294 of 2022. The legislative document was first piloted before Grenada's Parliament on July 23, 1976, under the regime of Sir Eric Matthew Geary, which paved the way for the American Offshore Medical Institution to be established on January 17, 1977, exclusively as a medical school in the first instance, before adding graduate and undergraduate programs in 1996. The recent amendment also facilitates the change of majority ownership of the school to an equity partner, which in turn has triggered the payment of a $20 million grant to the Grenadian Treasury, with no strings attached, as revealed by Charles Modica at a press conference in St. George's last week. However, in the 2014 amendment order on the exemption from duties and taxes in subsection 7, it says, quote, "So long as the ownership of the university shall remain in St. George's University LLC and not be transferred to any other identity, neither the university nor St. George's University LLC or any of their respective affiliates shall be liable to pay any licensing fee or property transfer tax or similar tax. Notwithstanding the foregoing, mortgages on university-owned property will be subject to the applicable and customary mortgage recording tax, if any." Unquote. Here to help us unpack these questions are Nazim Burke, Grenada's former Minister of Finance, and Sandra Ferguson, a civil society representative. The continued intergenerational transformation of the National Democratic Congress, a process which started with the election of its new political leader last year, came in for much scrutiny and fanfare last week in the historic parish of St. Patrick. Grenadians on both sides of the political spectrum ought to be proud that the main opposition party is attempting to mount a viable alternative to the current administration, especially as the next election will be a referendum on the leader of the country. The new NDC slate has to be a winning formula for the health of the very young democratic process in Grenada, but a slate, except for a few of its candidates, that has never been tested at the polls. But of course, all politicians start somewhere, unlike the TGM, which hasn't even managed to make it out of the gate, as well as the anachronistic Grenada United Labour Party, who are attempting to be relevant to a generation of Grenadians that barely know much about their rich yet complicated history. Political parties, however, are essential institutions of democracy. By competing in elections and serving people, parties offer citizens a choice in governance, and while in opposition, they can hold governments accountable to the extent that the Westminster system of democracy allows them to. In the last 8 years, the current administration has not had a serious constitutional check on governance, and we must all root for that to change, regardless of which side you support. When citizens join political parties, volunteer their time, donate money, and vote for their leaders, they are exercising their basic constitutional rights to so do. Last week, several young people took that very leap of constitutional faith, and in so doing, secured their place in Grenadian history, and that must be celebrated. The life of public service is hard, and those who choose to serve people in this capacity do so at great sacrifice. But while we must celebrate these accomplishments, I couldn't help but notice the perennial issue we have in Grenada with respect to the nature and tenor of public discourse that is played out on social media and in the local press. Some overly zealous party sympathizers, and note I say some overly zealous party sympathizers, newcomers, and long-standing surrogates of the NDC, instead of examining the merits of the issues raised by people such as Cassandra Mitchell, Michael Batiste, and independent journalist Callistra Farrier, emphasis here on independent, have gone on the offensive to defend their partisan turf. In some respects, these partisans are engaging in the same conduct they accuse their opponents of the NNP of practicing. If our public discourse is one that engages in whataboutism and personal attacks, then it is hard to see how we can raise the quality of civic discourse in our society, as my former teacher, now NDC Deacon Mitchell, has called for since his election. For the avoidance of doubt, the issues raised by Farrier et al. Would be weaponized by the ruling party in the lead-up to the next election. In other words, Cassandra, Michael, and Callistra are the least of your worries. We should, on the other hand, be grateful that these issues are being raised and ventilated in the first place, as it is essential to the health of the democratic process. Dissent is also critical in functioning democracies. If a country has to grow in a holistic manner, where not only the economic rights, but also the constitutional rights of the citizen are to be protected, then dissent and disagreement has to be permitted, and in fact, should be encouraged. It is only if there is discussion, dispassionate disagreement, and critical dialogue that we can arrive at better ways of governing our society. A pleasant good morning again, viewers and listeners, and I'm actually very excited for today's show. I have two members of the National Democratic Congress, a former political leader of the party and a former deputy political leader of the party. But before we get into it, I do have a correction based on last week's show. Now, we reported that the St. Patrick West constituency has 10 polling divisions, when in fact that constituency only has 9 polling divisions. Additionally, the largest polling division in the constituency is RO3. The Bubb Report apologizes for the inaccurate reporting on that score, and also thank viewer Sasha Williams for that observation. But at this point, I wish to take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Joseph Andall to the Bubb Report. And Mr. Andall, we welcome you to our conversations on our Caretaker candidate series that we're having here on the report. And we are happy to tell you that you are the first NDC Caretaker candidate that we're having in this slot. So we're very happy to have you here, sir.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Could you just bear with me a moment, please? I think my son has left a very loud device on.
All right, that's okay. Mr. Andel is doing some housekeeping matters, but I also have Mr. Burke here. Mr. Burke, this is actually your very first time on the Bubb Report. You will be coming up in the second segment. So it's good to have you here, sir. I think Mr. Burke is having some connection issues there. But as a programming note, viewers and listeners, we were also expected to have Mr. Anthony Boson, who is the current Member of Parliament for the St. Patrick West Constituency. Mr. Boson did promise that he was going to appear on the program today to discuss the SGU change of ownership issue, himself a former Minister of Finance and a former Minister of Education. And so we felt that it was important to hear his perspective. But last evening, Mr. Boson sent us a note, and I'm going to quote from this note from Mr. Boson. He said, it was with a deep sense of regret that I must inform you of my non-availability for your much anticipated program tomorrow. I've just been informed of a pre-convention retreat by members of our strategy and planning committee scheduled for tomorrow at around the same time. And he goes on to say, as party chairman, I must be present. Once again, my deepest apology for not being able to be on your program. With best wishes, Tony Boson. That's a note from Mr. Anthony Boson. But Mr. Andel, let's see if we can get you back. Are you hearing us loud and clear, sir?
Yes, I'm hearing you loud and clear. And once again, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on your program for the very first time.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Andel, you've been given the nod by your constituents again, the constituency branch of the St. Patrick West NDC, for coming up as the candidate against whoever the NNP candidate would be for that area. What makes you think that this occasion would be different, that this election would be different?
Good. We have learned some lessons from the past. There were some things that we did before. We worked hard, but this time, in addition to working hard, we're working smarter. Our machinery is being put in place, and I believe that it is going to be in much better shape than we were in a couple of years ago. The question of resources to fight a campaign, I believe that this time we are in a much better position than 2013 and 2018. Our outreach to the wider constituency is well underway. In fact, we have been knocking on doors in the constituency since 2020. We have already covered more than half of the polling divisions in the constituency. And in fact, today we are going to do a touchdown in polling division 2, Mountrich, where members from the different polling divisions are going to come together, and we are going to go knocking on doors in the Mountrich area from 3 p.m. this afternoon. We have been having contacts with and from people who were previously apathetic, who had become disillusioned by the political process. Many of them, former members or people who were just standing by, bystanders, have reached out and have come on board and helping in tangible ways. In fact, even people who previously voted for and supported the other side have started to come forward. They believe in our message, they believe in our vision, they believe that we have what it takes to engineer the type of change that our country needs and to get out of the doldrums, out of the stagnation that we have found ourselves in different spheres over the years. So all of that gives me great confidence that this time we are going to recapture the St. Patrick West seat.
Mr. Andel, let's get into it. Now, in my examination of the last election results, the NDC did in fact run up numbers in 3 of the polling divisions. Actually, you won by comfortable margins in those polling divisions. If you are able to keep that trend there, where do you see yourself picking up additional votes in other polling divisions that would give you that edge?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we noticed in our recent field canvassing efforts over the past 18 months or so is that in our strongest areas, particularly in polling division 3, quite a number of our people, or people who would normally have supported us, did not register or did not turn out to vote. We have been making contact with those people, and we are seeing to it that they do get registered. We are keeping them informed and involved. I believe that they are highly motivated, and we are confident that our numbers in our strong areas are going to pick up. We are also confident that in the areas where we traditionally did not do too well, that we are going to close the gap, if not overturn the deficit in some of those areas. So things are looking.
Mr. Andel, you know, you and you know, your leader and your team, you have exuded a significant level of confidence over the last couple of days. And of course, it's always good to have confidence. But we have to be realistic that you're coming up against a well-oiled machine. You're coming up against a political party that, in some respects, is GULP 2.0 in the context of 21st century Grenada. In the St. Patrick West Constituency, the NDC has had successes there, but some might say that the NNP is deeply entrenched in that area. You know, we hear issues of a very deep partisanship in that constituency over issues such as housing, people receiving, housing opportunities based on their political affiliation. You do have a number of very vocal activists in the St. Patrick West constituency. The NNP has a radio station. Let us be real. Real FM, they have sympathies to the government. And so they do have very deeply entrenched tentacles in that constituency. How do you overcome that?
First of all, you correctly said that we have had success in the not too distant past in that constituency. And I believe that St. Patrick West is what you should call a toss-up seat, in that generally the margins are not insurmountable. And a swing of 150 to 200 votes can make all the difference in a constituency like the one that I am contesting. So we are not daunted by the fact that we came out on the short end in the last 2 occasions. And given the quality of work that we have been putting in and the way that the people have been responding to us, we feel confident that we are going to cross the line first this time around. So in terms of some of the issues that you highlighted, the partisan nature of the distribution of government goods and services, I believe, well, this is emblematic of the incumbent in that they generally seek to tribalize Grenada and to use the resources of the government as inducement or punishment. And this is something that we need to change for the good of our country. We should not continue in this way of marginalizing a big section of our population simply because of their political affiliation. Mm-hmm. It is healthy for there to be more than one perspective in terms of the route, the path that we take towards national development. And the fact that somebody or some other group does not share the same vision that we do, or even if they have the same vision, they are looking at an alternative path towards reaching the goal. We should not let that put permanent divisions among us. We should not let it cause us to deprive patriotic, tax-paying citizens of their just deserts. there's enough space in Grenada for all of us, even if we differ politically. And one of the things that I intend to pursue, in fact, I've already embarked on that, is to have a more embracing approach towards politics, a more inclusive approach through consultation and through being in touch with the people constantly. It is time that we put an end to this tribalism, because Grenada is only going to suffer from it.
Now, Mr. Andel, let us segue into some of the issues that affects the St. Patrick West constituency. Health is huge. The quality of healthcare in St. Patrick West. We're talking about the St. Patrick Health Center, and I believe there is a health center in Mount Rich. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that that health center is not functioning as it should, that it is not properly resourced. We also have issues with respect to the Breakwater project. But I want to get you to respond to what your administration's approach would be with respect to addressing healthcare in the St. Patrick West constituency.
Well, first of all, we need to take an integrated approach towards healthcare. We have to focus on wellness rather than on illness. Of course, illness is inevitable. We are human beings and we have all different types of issues to contend with health-wise. But we have to start focusing on primary healthcare, on preventive measures. We have to focus on clean communities. We have to then look at nutrition, the balance or the connection between nutrition, physical exercise, mental health, and then, as a last resort, the availability of facilities and personnel to deal with conditions that arise due to illness or accidents. Now, we have gone backwards in St. Patrick as a whole. There was a time not too long ago when women used to be able to give birth to their babies at the health complex in Sauteurs, barring your first child or complications. We have now lost that service. And we have a situation now where women have to travel all the way down to St. George's. There are some things that do not announce themselves. They just come up on you. In the event of an emergency or some sort of unplanned situation, people have to brace the long, bumpy, pothole road all the way down to St. George's. So one of the things that we intend to focus on is the restoration of maternity services at the Sauteurs Health Center. The building has deteriorated physically over the years, and that is something that we are going to pay urgent attention to. Personnel, trained personnel. We have unfortunately encountered situations in the recent past where people have arrived at the health complex in Sauteurs alive and died before they could be attended to, before oxygen could be administered, and so on. And we think that this is unacceptable in the 21st century. The technology is available. We need to ensure that we equip not only the Sauteurs Health Facility, but all others throughout the parish and the country. Regarding the one at Mount Rich, that was allowed to deteriorate to the point where the building was no longer habitable, and so it was abandoned. The effect of that is further strain on the Sauteurs Health Center, Health Complex, and the Hermitage Medical Station, because many of the people who used the facility at Mount Rich are now forced to take a bus and go to Hermitage or Sauteurs, stretching the capacity of those two facilities, and in some cases incurring additional financial burdens on the elderly people of Mount Rich and Snell Hall who have chronic diseases that they need to have treated on a weekly or on a regular basis. So we are committed to restoring that facility to ease the strain on Hermitage and Sauteurs.
And our constituents who are from St. Patrick West or in the St. Patrick area who is looking at the Bubb Report, we would love to hear your comments and those comments we would take on air with Mr. Andel. We also do apologize for that that feedback that we're getting. I have no control over that. I don't think Mr. Andel has any control over that. So we do apologize for that. But Mr. Andel, let us talk about the Breakwater project. That has been a source of significant contention, and it has impacted residents. It has, in fact, displaced residents. What would an NDC government do? What would you do as a parliamentary representative to ensure that this project is, that there are mitigating factors in place to ensure that no more residents lose their houses or that they have to be displaced?
Okay, first let me say that we do believe that a project of that nature, if not necessarily in the way that it was constructed, but something of that nature was needed to protect the low town area of Sotes because the coastline was taking a battering. And I don't think that anybody would say that a level of protection was not needed. Our contention was that the project was rushed into to score political points just prior to the 2018 election. There was no environmental or social impact assessment done prior to implementation of that project. As a result of that, what is now happening in Mount Rodney, in fact, just a few days ago, I was moved because not too long ago I lived in Derby and I used to have to travel that road 3-4 times a day. And there were several meters of sand between the road and the edge of the sea. Right now, there's just literally about 2 coconut trees standing between the road and the sea. So we are also committed to engaging the necessary experts to see what can be done to first stop the damage and then hopefully reverse it. That area is a truly beautiful, a really scenic spot with good potential as a recreational area for residents, not only of St. Patrick, but other parts of Grenada. It has potential for balanced tourism development, for the establishment of a local park, for example. And so we see it as a priority to take measures to restore the Mount Rodney Beach as much as is possible to what it used to be. There's also implications for the communities further west, such as Mount Alexander, Derby, Prospect. Those areas are served by a flimsy temporary bridge that was built, I would say, about 7 or so years ago when the main one was washed away. And that bridge cannot accommodate heavy traffic. In fact, it's a double bridge, and the one further inland is extremely hazardous. It's narrow, curvy, and we are not too sure about its structural integrity. So anything can happen with that bridge at any moment. And now with the threat from the sea on the Mount Rodney end of the road, it is quite possible that those communities of Mount Alexander, Derby, and Prospect can one day find themselves totally cut off, isolated from the rest of the parish. So it is urgent.
But Mr. Andel, you would appreciate, I want to go back to something you said earlier in your response to this question. You said that this project was rushed, but would it be fair to say that government, and yes, you're also saying that it was a politically motivated project, but at the same time, businessmen in the constituency of St. Patrick West, including Kenny Lawson, who we had here last week, he suggested that there was an urgency to treat with the Breakwater project because of its threat to the town of Sotes. How do you respond to the claim that, how do you reconcile those two competing ideas?
Good, and that's a valid question, but we must always be guided by the wisdom of our older folk who say that a hurried bird never builds a good nest. Mm-hmm. And what we are seeing here is that one problem was partially resolved, but a much bigger one has emanated from it. So notwithstanding the urgency of the situation, I do not believe that there is a genuine excuse for rushing that project in the manner that it was in. And when you listen, all of the rhetoric around that project was centered around Tillman didn't want this, NDC didn't want that for such, which was totally irrelevant. Okay, so whatever, it has happened already, and there is no point in, lamenting over what could have or should have been done. What we have to look at now is the way forward, and we are quite committed as a party, and I, as an individual, and hopefully the next MP for the area, I will take it as a personal responsibility to ensure that everything that can be done to remedy that situation be done as speedily as possible, but with the correct procedures and processes.
All right, Mr. Andal, it would be remiss of me if I did not address some dynamics that are taking place in your political organization. Now, you were a former deputy political leader of the NDC. Have you ever experienced a time in your role as deputy political leader when you did not show up for a major high-profile party event? Was that ever a thing that happened under your stewardship as deputy political leader?
I do not recall if there was at any time any activity or event that I could not attend or anybody else could not attend. I think that we would bring the organization up to speed on that score.
Okay, and the question has to do with the absence of the deputy political leader, the current deputy political leader, your predecessor, Mr. Adrian Thomas. He's been conspicuously absent from that major party event. I just want to get your thoughts. The narrative now, the prevailing narrative is that there are still rumblings of disunity in your political organization. The fact that Mr. Thomas did not appear, and of course, to be fair, I also called Mr. Thomas because I like to get it from the horse's mouth, and he did indicate that he was on a break. So we have to also take that into consideration. But how does the party move forward with those tensions, those perceived tensions between what some are calling the old guard and the new guard in the lead up to the next general elections? The prime minister, who says that he has a bill in his pocket, can decide that he can call the election tomorrow, sensing those growing pains in the organization.
All right, I'll try to be as direct and as brief as possible. I think you answered one part of your question, the question of my good friend Adrian Thomas. I cannot think of a more dedicated and committed team player than my good friend, Brother Adrian. And he, I think, is in the best position to say why he has not been able to attend certain functions. So I will not venture into the realms of speculation about that. Regarding alleged tension in the party, I'm not aware of any tension in the party. The question about so-called old guard and new guard, that is an invention of, well, I don't want to blame the media or any.
Well, it's not an invention; it's a reality. You do have younger people that are being infused in the organization. How then do you define that?
What this shows is that the NDC is serious about generational change in leadership. We do not believe that any one person or one generation has a monopoly on wisdom, has a monopoly on foresight and insight. And we believe that in order for an organization to remain relevant, to grow, and to place itself to face emerging challenges, there must be a regeneration of leadership. Nobody, not Nazimberg, not Tillman Thomas, not Joseph Andel, not Claudette Joseph, none of us has any inherent right to be the leader of the party. We all play different leadership roles. The team that I'm a part of is a well-connected team. I do not sense, I do not feel any tensions. We socialize, we get along. I see Tevin and Ron as my sons, almost. I think they look up to people like me and Persuader and Patrick Simmons as father figures. So I believe that we are building a really beautifully working team in the NDC. We have some older, some more mature heads in the mix. We have some in the middle, age-wise, experience-wise, and we are blooding some young people. Now, talking about the young people, last night I had a very interesting conversation with somebody who said, "Whoa, all your candidates and I'm too young." So I said to her, I don't think so. I'm not an old man, but I don't think that you would classify me as a youth. My daughter is in her early 30s. I have two sons in their mid 20s. Good. So I think I've earned those gray hairs that you're seeing here, Kellan. Right? Dickon Mitchell, while new to politics, is a seasoned attorney, well respected in his field nationally and regionally. He's also a businessman and investor. And all of those experiences that he has acquired over the years are being brought to bear in a very positive way in the political arena. Senator Karen James, though young in age, has some political mileage under her belt now. She served a couple of years in the Senate, so she is no longer wet behind the ears. Quince Britton is almost a sort of de facto MP for St. Mark. In fact, most of the few positive things that happen in that constituency happen because of the agitation and the intervention of Quince Britton. And so this question about too young, that really does not hold any water.
Well, yes, and Mr. Andel, I would agree with you there, because let us be real, the Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, he became Prime Minister of Grenada in his 30s, right? Yeah. If we look at the current Prime Minister of Grenada, in fact, when he contested his first elections on a GNP ticket, he was very young.
He was in his 20s.
He was in his 20s, right? On a GNP ticket, and so the People's Alliance, a lot of the candidates for the People's Alliance were also young. So I honestly do not subscribe to that narrative, and I think we have to get out of that mindset that you have to wait your turn. That is an attitude that Grenadians have. Sorry to be pontificating like this.
No, but you're correct.
But I think the point needs to be made. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you're correct. And I mean, just to put it into further perspective, the current Prime Minister of our country became leader of his party at age 42 or 43, which is younger than Dickon Mitchell now is. So what you find is that some people are trying to bite from both ends of the stick. Oh, you need to get new blood, And then when you get new blood, your blood is too new. I think that we have not a perfect, but a beautiful blend in the NDC, and we continue to reach out to spread our net to bring in more talented Grenadians into the fold. Yeah.
But in doing so, Mr. Andel, and then viewers and listeners will get to your questions. In doing so, the caveat here is unity, party unity. Because, for example, Deacon Mitchell, deciding, obviously, Persuader did make the offer, by the way, and that has to be stated. He did make the offer that wherever the political leader of the party wants to run, that he should be given that option. Persuader did say that. But at the same time, it must also be acknowledged that the process through which Mr. Mitchell went ahead to become the caretaker candidate in St. David, and that is a question I will be putting to him, was not necessarily one that was amenable to many members of that particular constituency. And that point needs to also be made. But Mr. Andel, let me get to some questions. I believe we have some of your constituents here. And please, viewers, do not hesitate to share the program. Let's see here. We have Michelle McLeish saying, urgency because his building was being battered. I believe she's talking about Kenny Lal Singh's building in St. Patrick West, which was impacted by the rising sea levels there. Then we have another question from Joan Wellington. She's saying, River Sally Medical Station needs attention too. Let's see here. Let's see. Another question from a constituent, Michelle again. Some time ago, I went to get a COVID test done. When I called, they said they weren't testing at 1 p.m. I got there for that time. When I arrived, they said that the nurses went on lunch. I waited until 2:45 p.m. before they resumed testing. Jay is saying the doctors say Hermitage Medical Station making yeast, like it make flour and salts too. NNP to blame. I don't get the context of that comment. Let's see. Jose
I
Onesto
think
is
the
saying,
yeast might be the little thing that they call old lady sugar that comes out from termite infestation. I believe that. I'm just guessing.
Thanks for that context there. Thanks for that education. Mr. Andel, you will be going up against a son of Soteas who is well known, also a youth and community organizer amongst the young folks. What do you think will be your chances going up against him as a first-timer in politics? He is also a first-timer in politics. That's if the candidate, assuming that the candidate is Mr. Victor Philip.
Okay. Am I to answer this right now?
Yes, sir.
As I said before, I feel very confident, and my focus is on my task, the issues that I would like to see tackled, on reaching out to all constituents, regardless of whether they support NDC or supported the other party or other parties, or they were undecided or uninvolved before. And while I, of course, do have to pay attention to whoever my opponent may be, that will not be a primary focus for me. My focus will be on my campaign, on my message, and on getting my message to the constituents. I have no control over what any opponent does or does not do, and therefore I use my energy to build my own campaign, to build my team, and to ensure that my structures are in place for the challenges.
Okay. All right. Cassandra Mitchell, another contributor, she's saying, frankly, the youth narrative started with supporters of the main opposition party. Instead of focusing on young Mitchell's age, emphasis should have been placed on his competency for the position. And then we have another question from Karen Drema. He's saying, what can be done on the cost of living? The prices of goods on the shelf, rising price in fuel, gas, and electricity, and the high taxes. How will the NDC address this issue, Mr. Andel?
Okay, good. Now, taxes are essential to run any economy. However, we do believe that with the structural adjustment program having been in place for what should have been 3 years, that we have not seen any significant reduction in taxes. There are also some nuisance taxes which bring in relatively little revenue to the government, but place unnecessary burdens on the smaller people in the economy. These are some of the areas that we will address. Regarding the cost of living, a lot of it is imported, but there can be measures taken by the government to mitigate. Everyone will have noticed that over the past few months, there has been a dramatic increase in prices of several imported goods. And the main reason for that is the increase in international freight charges. Now, when government is computing duties on imported goods, the cost of freight comes into the freight. So you find that if a unit cost $100 to bring in 6 months ago, and that the cost of that unit is still $100 because the cost of freight has gone up, you now find that you have the $100, which is the true cost of the unit, plus the additional cost of freight, and then the government duty is computed on the basis of the cost of the item plus the cost of freight. So we believe that government can make some adjustments to the way it calculates duties on imported to give some form of relief to the poor and the struggling working class people of our country. But we believe also that what this reflects is our, up to this point, unwillingness, I won't say inability, to use local produce, local products, to encourage local cottage industries, local manufacturing, to reinvest in agriculture as a means of dealing with import substitution and promoting local industries, creating jobs, getting the younger hands and minds involved in productive activity. So there is a multi-pronged approach that we ought to take in order to tackle the problem of high cost of living. And then the way that we plan to tackle it will not only deal with cost of living, but will address issues of health, of chronic diseases, and so on. We must take a multifaceted approach towards the way we manage our economy and our society as a whole.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? You said
Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds unconstitutional. But why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing socio-economic issues that I would want to address with you.
In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bubb Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bubb Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
Viewers and listeners, I do apologize for that connection. We had a temporary power outage here in Washington, D.C. Yes, we do have power outages in the nation's capital, so I do apologize for that. And Mr. Andal, thank you for staying with us. I do apologize for that break in transmission. But I want to give you an opportunity, Mr. Andal, to end with some closing comments. What does your ground game, and you spoke to that, but the ground game of the National Democratic Congress moving forward as the anticipation election date is drawing closer?
Good. We have been feeling the pulse of the people over the past couple of years. We have learned many lessons from our failures at the poll in the past, and we are taking steps to ensure that we do not repeat those mistakes. Our focus is on our team and our message. We wish to reassure the public that there will always be rumors floating around, especially considering that politics is adversarial by nature. So your opponent will always be looking to exploit what they consider to be your weak points. I wish to assure everyone that in the 9 years that I've been in the NDC, we have always been a united force. Differences of opinion does not mean division. In fact, that is very healthy. If everyone were a yes man or a yes woman, you know what would eventually happen.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Mr. Andel. Differences of opinion should be encouraged.
Yes. And one thing I would like to advise people that we have very energetic and enthusiastic supporters over whose postings on social media or whatever they say on the blog, at the shop, we have no control over that. Just as how the other party, I'm sure, have enthusiastic supporters who write and say things that the hierarchy of the party cannot control. But we intend to set a tone. In fact, we have already set a tone of positivity of focusing on what we want to do with the people to transform our country for the benefit of the vast majority of our people. So it will be about our message, our message, our message, our team, our team. We do not want to get into the back and forth, into the mauvais langue and the finger pointing and the mud slinging. Those who want to sling mud, let them be welcome to it. They're going to have to come up to meet us because we are not going to go down into the mud. We are calling on all Grenadians to recognize the importance of the upcoming poll, to recognize that we need to transform our country from one that has become a place where people have become or trained to become dependent on politicians into one where we go back to our self-reliant roots, supporting each other. And of course, we know that there's a role for the government to play in terms of looking after those who are incapable of looking after themselves. But we must go back to the days of self-reliant, a country of people who sit down and await handouts cannot develop itself. That approach might help political parties get into power and stay into power, but it will not transform Grenada. And if we do not transform our country, we are going to continue to lose our best minds. We look at the healthcare situation, for example, where about 3 years ago, we lost about 85 nurses in one fell swoop. And now, even before, the situation was dire, but now it is worse because you go to a ward with one poor nurse having to deal with 30, 35, 40 patients, and the nurses are humans. Sometimes some of them may snap, and then people have the worst things to say about them. But what we need to do is focus on ways to improve our healthcare system, ways to provide food and nutritional security for our country, ways to upgrade the infrastructure of our country without engaging in massive corruption, because corruption is costly. If the true cost of building 100 feet of road is $100,000, but because of bubble and corruption, we inflate the contract to $250,000. It means that $150,000 that could have gone into refurbishing the Monkridge Medical Station has gone into the pockets of corrupt individuals. So corruption is costly. It costs you your healthcare, it costs you education, it costs us genuine developmental opportunities. So these are the things that we want to focus on going forward: our message, promote our unity, engage the people, and put forward a credible plan and program that will foster sustainable, long-term, inclusive national development.
Well, Mr. Andal, I will be watching this space, and as an independent journalist, an unbossed independent journalist, I'm not in the pocket of anyone. I will ensure that if the NDC were to ever achieve state power, that I would come back to the tape and hold you to account, hold your party to account where these issues are concerned. Also, as a programming note, viewers and listeners, we have invited the National Democratic Congress through its public relations officer to have the other caretaker candidates on our platform over the next 4 or 5 weeks, culminating with the political leader himself. That is a commitment we made on the Bubb Report at the beginning of the year to change our programming format to ensure that we're hearing from the caretakers of the various constituencies, which gives us a flavor of what is happening locally. And so we thank you, Mr. Andel, for your appearance on the Bubb Report.
Thank you very much for the opportunity afforded me this morning. I must say that I enjoyed your balanced, probing, fair line of questioning and interaction. I wish to commend you on that and to encourage you to continue along that independent, tough but fair line.
We do need that. Grenada needs that.
Yes, and the National Democratic Congress, we welcome these opportunities that you have so graciously provided to us to have a dialogue with the Grenadian public and with the diaspora in general. So
absolutely. And we also did invite Mr. Victor Philip and of course he cancelled on last minute last week. But we're hoping that Mr. Victor Philip, your presumptive opponent, would be able to appear on the Bubb Report when it is convenient to him and his party.
Well, I have lots of things to discuss, so if the other side is unwilling or unavailable, feel free to call on me.
Absolutely, Mr. Andel, but let's see how that will play out. In fact, we also had Nolan Cox of the NNP. I see someone is asking about Cox. He was on the program 2 weeks ago, so we did have that opportunity as well. All right, Mr. Andel, thank you. We have to take a quick break, and we will be back with the panel segment of the week. Viewers and listeners,
thank you again, and goodbye to all the listeners and viewers. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
So long.
Country. By this order, Mr. Speaker, SGU and the people of Grenada further enhance their relationship. And the following are some of the positive aspects of this. Financial. As part of the transaction with new changing of shares, passage of change of shares for the university's control, in the changes identified in its equity holdings, there will be, the university has agreed to provide a $20 million grant payment to the government and people of Grenada, Caretaker, and PT Martinique immediately. Mr. Speaker, we have done nothing except satisfy the law that we've signed. Other governments have been involved in that too over the years since St. George's University way back in the 70s when it was started. They get free concessions on a number of the activities they're doing. So we satisfy that. We've done no more than that. You're getting $20 million for a change in share ownership. And they agreed to give us another advance of $10 million. So when this is done at the Parliament of the country, by the end of this week, early next week, we'll have $30 million, Mr. Speaker, addition to the coffers of the taxpayers of Grenada, Caretaker, and PT Martinique. $30 million.
And welcome back, folks. I'm happy to be joined at this time by the former Minister of Finance of Grenada, who is also the former political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Of course, this was not planned at all. It coincided with the theme and topic of the program. So, Mr. Bubb, we welcome you to the Bubb Report.
Thank you very much, Kalan, and let me say good afternoon or good morning to your listeners and your viewers, wherever they are, whatever time of day. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to be here for the first time.
Absolutely. And also a first-time guest, Sandra Ferguson, is joining us by audio. Sandra Ferguson, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Good morning, Dr. Bubb. Good morning, Mr. Berg. Good morning to your listeners and viewers. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And Naz, I want to start with you. Mr. Burke, I always call you Naz in the past. But yes, let's start with you. Before we get into the meat of the matter with respect to today's conversation on SGU change of ownership, how do you react to a resurgent, what some are saying is a resurgent NDC? What are your thoughts with respect to the recent launch of their candidates and, of course, the launch of the other candidates to come? And now you are on the sidelines looking at that.
I think it's an exceptionally positive development. Yeah, I always maintain that young people have the drive, they have the energy, they have the enthusiasm, the creativity, and the imagination to push things and to create change. Those of us who are more older and more experienced have to find a way to assist them, because every generation has to write its own chapter in the country's history. We can't write the chapter that the generation that is in their 30s and 40s have to write today. And that's why we welcome this change, and we believe that it was a very important and strategic move by the National Democratic Congress to pivot at this particular point. I believe that both parties are going to have to pivot. For the reason that the party has been struggling for some time, as you know. The NNP, because its leader has now reached the age of 74, 75 years old, and will move on in a matter of time, and the party will have to find new leadership. So if both political parties have to pivot and create change, and NDC is able to pivot before the NNP, it may well give the NDC a leg up, an advantage, a strategic for the next 10 years or so. So I think it's a very positive development, and I must say that we are very excited about what is happening inside of the party and in the country as a whole, as far as the party's momentum and party's involvement is concerned.
Okay, and no concerns about inter-NISA intentions?
You know, I listened a moment ago to, I listened to Brother Andal's presentation. I thought it was tremendous. He was mature, he was balanced, he was instructive in all that he said. And I think he's absolutely right when he says that over the last 9 years, there has really been, as a matter of fact, no serious division within the party. This is the figment of other people's imagination, and they've done it because they understood.
Well, Mr. Burke, no, I would push back there. You're saying that there's no division in the party. I mean, the party lost an election because of internecine divisions.
No,
But please proceed.
I'm saying in the last 9 years.
Last 9 years, okay.
In other words, we know that what happened in 2011 and 2012, but I'm saying after that, the party has been on a steady course of rebuilding, on a steady course of uniting, on a steady course of building, team building. And I think that despite the losses in the election, the party has managed to build units and to work together for the common good. So I really, I don't sense any tensions at the moment, frankly speaking. I really don't. I cannot say that anything has happened in recent times, surely since Deacon became the leader of the party, that would suggest to me that people are divided or that there's tension. I am aware that, the circumstances in which Persuader ceased to be the caretaker in the constituency has raised some eyebrows, but the fact of the matter is Persuader did say, and I think he was absolutely right in this, the political leader has to be given the prerogative to choose the seat he wants to run in. I don't think that really is in dispute. Whether it's the NDC or any other political party, that's how it is. And so I don't have a concern about tension in the organization at this time at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Burke, thank you for that. Now, let us get into the recent change of ownership around the St. George's University. Talk to us about the tax laws whenever a change of company ownership occurs in the country. What revenues does the state collect as a result of such changes?
Perhaps the most important one would be the property transfer taxes, yeah? Because our property laws say that our Property Transfer Act covers both real property in the sense of land and buildings, of course, and then also shares. And it says that if somebody if somebody sells land or sells shares, certain tax consequences will flow. If the owner of those shares is a non-citizen, then they must pay 10%. If it's land, it's different from if it's 5% if it's land, 10% if it's shares. Yes. If the purchaser is not a resident, then they must pay 10% of the purchase price or the value of the transaction, put it properly, to the government. Yeah, so there is a consequence to transferring ownership, and that is true every time. When Joe Blow buys a piece of land in Grenada, or sells a piece of land in Grenada, they have to pay taxes. Yeah, when somebody sells shares as a foreign person, they have to pay taxes. So this exemption from taxes is really an exception to the general rule. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, as you know, the government, the SGU was established way back in 1977, and one of the main features of the tax legislation of the act that created the university was that there was a lot of exemptions from taxes, from duties. They got a lot of breaks, really. Leases on lands, duty concessions, the right to establish the university, the exclusive right to set up a medical school on the island, and so on. That is what came with the 1976 agreement. In 1996, that particular law was amended somewhat, and the government then tried to create some structure to that relationship so that it spoke to the recognition of degrees. It spoke to the establishment of a monitoring committee. It spoke to the exclusive right for the university to run the university here, to conduct clinical programs, it spoke to the affiliation with the TAMCC, and a number of other such arrangements. It in fact provided for scholarships. It provided for 5 medical scholarships, 2 pre-med scholarships, and 8 scholarships in the what you might call the arts and sciences program. So this was the first time that tuition-free scholarships were being introduced. And then when the government came in, when the National Democratic Congress government came in 2010, the government sought to expand both the vision for that collaboration with the university and the scope of the cooperation. So it introduced a number of other things that were not in the first agreement. For example, it made it clear now for the first time that the government and the university were going to establish a clinical teaching program. Yes, a clinical teaching program and a university, all right, a teaching hospital. I'm sorry, not a university, a teaching hospital. And these things went on. It made provision for all of the same things that the government provided for, but it also made provisions for other things. It spoke to the question of research and made specific provisions for research. And it made specific provision that what did not exist before for collaboration with the university. And it also provided for the expansion of the vet school, something that was very important. It increased the amount of monies that the university was going to have to pay every year to the government. And these things were part and parcel of the arrangement. Of course, under the 2010 agreement, these concessions and duties continued, yes? In 2014, the government amended that arrangement. And one of the most important things that the government did in that arrangement, in the 2014 arrangement, was that provision that you read this morning, which essentially said that even though generally the university will be exempt from taxes and duties and other related charges, where the owner, that was section 7, I think it read. You had it up a moment ago.
Yes, let me pull that up.
It said, this was the 2014 agreement, and what it said was, I think it's important to read it, yeah, just to say that.
Yes.
Let's find it here.
Yes, so long as the ownership of the university shall remain in St. George's University LLC and not be transferred to any other entity, neither university nor St. George's University LLC or any of their respective affiliates shall be liable to pay any licensing fee or property transfer tax or similar tax. Notwithstanding the foregoing, mortgages on university-owned property will be subject to the applicable and customary mortgage recording tax, if any, unquote.
Right. Now, this is a very important provision because I think what that provision did was give the government an out, give the government an opportunity for the first time since this arrangement came into effect in 1977 to charge taxes and duties and taxes where there was going to be a change of ownership in the university. That's what that clause did. It provided that the government can charge taxes and duties where ownership change. And while I have no documentation to support it, I think it is correct to say from the discussions that were taking place at the time that this was the result of some pressures that may have been put on by the IMF at the time of the structural adjustment program. They said, in effect, if you're going to embark upon a structural adjustment program, there should be a sharing of the burden. And St. George's University would have to share in that burden. And one of the ways to achieve that was going to have to be to reduce some of the duties and taxes, some of the duty concessions that you were providing to them at the time. So this provided an opportunity for the government, especially in the context of the structural adjustment program, to do something about it. As far as we know, nothing has happened really until this event. Nothing happened really that would suggest that the government had in fact really put any tax changes in the SGU arrangement. But this situation now involved a transfer of ownership. And this is where now the question becomes, how does government use that clause, clause 7? How does government apply clause 7? How does the government deal with clause 7 in the wake of what is clearly happening as some kind of a transfer of ownership of the university? Now, I have read that piece of legislation, the order that was passed several times, if I may say so, and you know, there are aspects of it which are quite convoluted, quite frankly, even for a lawyer. Yeah, and you know, but in the midst of that, you know, difficulty to sometimes interpret what exactly is intended, I think there are a few things that come out of this document. First, it suggests that from now on, if there is a change in control of the university will pay the government what is called a change of control grant. Yes, that's the first thing that comes out. Second, that change of control grant will be 3% of the value of the transaction. Third, the value of the transaction is to be determined by a formula which has as the main determinants, one, the value that is attributed to the transaction by the buyer and the seller. Now that is quite significant, because if you are buying a piece of land and you have to pay, or you're selling a piece of land and you have to pay property transfer tax, you and the buyer, if you're selling, you and the buyer can say that the property is worth, we're selling it for $150,000. But the government always reserves the right to go and do an assessment and see exactly what that land is worth. Yes? In other words, you might be selling a piece of land that is worth $500,000, but you're selling it at $150,000 because it means lower taxes for you, lower transfer taxes for you. So the government can say, you know what? We don't know that this is $150,000. We go in and check and see exactly what it is. What this agreement says is the buyer and the seller are going to determine what the value of that transaction really is. So that's one thing. Secondly, it says that the proceeds of any direct, this is another determinant, if you like, the proceeds of any direct dividends or distributions that are made in respect of you know, transfers of income over the 24 months before that. That too is significant, because if I know that I'm planning to sell the property 2 years from now, I can decide I want to manipulate in my payments of dividends, my payments of distributions to have a certain result. I can wait and not distribute so that my numbers would be lower, because my payout in distributions and dividends are lower. In other words, I can anticipate what I'm going to do to be able to pay less. Thirdly, it says that you know, the other thing that will determine the value of the transaction is the percentage of the share which itself is going to keep as a result of it. That is significant. The other thing that we can make from the agreement is that there is ongoing now what we will call a current change of control. It's taking place right now in the month of February.
Yes, Mr. Burke, stick a pin there. I want to bring in Sandra. Sandra, again, welcome to the program. Can you hear us? I think Sandra's phone is ringing there.
Hi. Yes.
Yes, Sandra. You've been listening to Mr. Burke. Now, by the way, as a programming note, we did reach out to the St. George's University with the intention of inviting Mr. Modica on the program. They did not respond to us because we always want to ensure that we have balance. Mr. Boson was in fact part of the 2014 amendment because at that time I believe he was either the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Education. I believe he would have been the Minister of Finance at the time.
Sandra, I think it was the Minister of Education.
He was the Minister of Education. So thank you for that. Thank you for that note of clarification.
The Honorable Prime Minister was the Minister of Finance.
That's right. Now, Sandra, the government would say to you that as a member of civil society that you all are just making noise, and that you all do not want to ensure that the government creates an enabling environment for an institution who is considered the second largest employer in the country to function with incentives that would keep them in the country. What say you?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that I speak in my individual and personal capacity today.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that would be it. The SGU is 40 years old, right? And a former Minister of Finance, and thank you, Mr. Burke, for that further clarifications, because why I have never seen the legislation, so that 2014 legislation, but I do know, and I think that you are quite correct, that it was as a result of pressure on the government in respect of the IMF, the Structural Adjustment Program. Now, the university has exemptions on a number of taxes, including corporation tax. It seems to also have, from the last agreement, they in Parliament, they reference cap 294A. Annual stamp taxes, withholding taxes, the property taxes have been adjusted. They are now trading internationally, and we must learn from that. So while there may be and yes, there is no doubt that the university has contributed significantly, and they have been enabled by all governments since they have been in Grenada, right? So it is now time, and I want to just bring you back to this, Kellen, because the press conference following, which happened this week, was very instructive. The Chancellor indicated that we awarded the government a grant,
which they can use to their women fancy. He also said that. Go ahead.
Yes, we wouldn't, and I'm going to come on to the use of it just now. But another very important point he made is that the Prime Minister, talked about how difficult it was to run the country, citing the erosion of the tax base. And then the Prime Minister himself, during the question and answer period, said he wished that other companies that get tax breaks, would do like SGU and give the government a grant after they have added up their profits. So clearly, it would seem to me that we are not negotiating from the point of strength that we have. Where is the study? Where is the study that indicates those contributions and quantify it? I ask about the leakages, because in addition to all of these, they have a number of exemptions, either 50% or 100% on operating costs. A government needs taxes, needs revenue, and the way it gets revenue is by taxes. We all have obligations to pay taxes. So I make no apologies for it. There is a problem here. SGU is not paying its fair share. It has now become this international company whose shares are traded internationally outside of Grenada, right? It is also benefiting from significant grants, right, intended to benefit countries like Grenada. It is located in Grenada. From climate change, other research grants, institutions of the Commonwealth. So while it is here providing opportunities, and that was the reason that it was embraced by all governments, Grenada has also offered and opened up opportunities for the SGU. So this is quite unbalanced. Now, when you talk about the scholarships, and they have opened the undergraduate school, and the Chancellor mentioned that we were paying taxes in another way. We have been paying taxes via scholarships. Have we quantified the value of the scholarships versus all the exemptions? Secondly, they also indicated that, both gentlemen indicated that, SGU has never refused a scholarship. What they did not tell you is that in the agreement, where the allocation exceeded that year, so, we gave 2 extra than we had planned for, the agreement provided that the next year it would be balanced. We would offer less scholarships. So this is a very unequal relationship. And it would seem to me to be deliberately so. Because while the Chancellor indicated, well, it's a grant and we can't tell them how to use it, one might remember the Prime Minister indicating, well, I've just come from my constituency, housing is a great need. What I found very significant after that observation, well, elections are coming up and we need to expand the materials. So the question is that $20 million or $30 million going to be used for electioneering?
You say
yes,
that, but you say that, and the government would say that they experienced a significant dip in revenue owing to the pandemic, and for you to extrapolate that they might be using this for electioneering, don't you think that's a stretch?
I am not stretched. This is not my comments. I just indicated to you that was the observations of the Prime Minister. Elections are coming up. We have to expand housing materials. I am merely asking if that is a question that we need to ask.
Okay, Mr. Burke, let me bring you back here. Do you want to piggyback on anything Sandra said, and then we will take a quick break and come back and wrap up?
Yes, I agree absolutely with Sandra. You see, there are 2 things that I think ought to be mentioned as a follow-up to what Sandra is saying. And the first is that, the reality is that if the university is worth, well, let me say first, this is presented more as an act of charity by the government than an entitlement, an act of charity by the university than an entitlement to the government. Is that really the way that you want to present the situation? There's a law that says the person who is buying the university, if there's a complete transfer, must pay 10% of the value of the transaction. If the university is $100 billion, is $1 billion US dollars, for example, yes, 10% of that is $100 million. Yeah. So if there was a complete transfer, the government would be entitled to $100 million. And so if you say, and remember that money is being paid by the purchaser, not by the university, by the purchaser. So if the government gets into an agreement now where the university is saying, we will give you $20 million, and you are agreeing in this agreement that you will not take any money from anybody else, including the purchaser, as a future shareholder, it means that the government's hands are tied, that it cannot even require the buyer of the shares to pay anything. So the university is negotiating with the government what the buyer is supposed to pay and how much, and whether the buyer pays anything at all. And they're saying, we will give you a grant of $20 million, which, or 3%, we'll give you a grant of 3%. The tax that the purchaser would have had to pay was 10%. We will give you a grant of 3%, and you cannot require the purchaser to take any money. So I agree with Sandra, it is really quite lopsided in the way that it is presented.
And let us get to some viewer questions and comments here. Kimberly is saying, exactly, Mr. Burke, the government is setting Grenada up like a charity case, and it's embarrassing. Let's see. Tessa Barry saying they should have included the agreement some directives to ensure transparency in how the money is being used. That is interesting because that debate happens now with China and the United States in terms of how, for example, the IMF doles out money through loans and grants and accountability frameworks that needs to be had there. Wilbur Thomas saying the issue is not SGU, but the structure of the concession we give to all investors across the board. I want to get your thoughts on that comment. Do you think that the structure is the issue here, Sandra and Mr. Burke?
Well,
yes, I would say
Go on, Sandra.
Yes, I would say that the structure is an issue, because we have this, and also it is the attitude and how we conduct the nation's business. You know, we go cap in hand, and as somebody indicated, always as if we are a charity case. But the way that we are managing, creates a charity case. So I would say, I definitely would say that this is a very important point, because that is how we're treating with a lot of investors, quote unquote.
Right.
Mr. Burke? Yes.
Yes,
go ahead.
I agree that there's a structure issue as it is with all companies. But again, you still have to look at the consequence. Yes. In other words, if you do that to a company whose turnover is $500,000 a year, it's different from a company whose turnover is $1 billion a year. So you can have a tiered arrangement depending on who you're dealing with. Yes. Naturally, management of finance involves calibration. Yeah, the government has to kind of weigh out, what can I get from this? What can I take from that? What do I give back in return to ensure that I don't kill the incentive? In other words, you don't tax people to the point where you suffocate the incentive to do things, but you're striking a balance between your needs for revenue and the need to ensure that you leave an incentive in place for people to do business. Yeah, so it may well be, for example, that even if the government says, instead of charging 10% on the transaction, we are going to say 5%, but it's a tax. We are not waiting on somebody to say they're nice to us, so they give us $20 million, because 10% would have been $100 million. You may say, we're putting on the tax, but it's going to be 5% instead of 10. Yeah, excuse me. In that way, it's $50 million. Yeah, so I agree with the observation that structure is important.
Absolutely, and Sandra, go
may
ahead,
I
Sandra.
make a point here, right?
Yes.
Because you see, okay, this is an institution that has been here long. It was invited here to make a difference, you know, and there is what you might call sentimental attachment. But we need to understand that now there is a certain transformation in what is happening with this company as well, okay? And we should learn lessons, for example, from what has happened to the banana industry. We were accustomed to dealing with Papa Geese, and there was a certain relationship. Then his company went public. Shareholders were interested in returns on equity. And while our ministers in the Windwards were engaged in a futile efforts, you know, to continue what was happening, Papa Geese and the new shareholders, those persons in control, were taking care of their business by planting banana fields in Costa Rica. So, you know, this is business. And again, are we negotiating? Are we negotiating on the basis of evidence of what has happened, or rather prefer to go cap in hand every time asking for something? Because when you look at the fact that we have had a university which boasts that it is the biggest supplier of doctors to the United States, how has our healthcare system evolved with that? Where is the impact? Back over to you.
Absolutely, and you make that point about the infrastructure, the state of healthcare in Grenada, juxtaposed against the backdrop of the institution. But that is a commitment that they also made in the press conference and in the Parliament, as you described. In fact, you described the Prime Minister's presentation as bombastic. I thought that was an interesting adjective there. But they also made a commitment to really work towards improving the healthcare system of the country. Now, to the extent that you know, that would really address some of the systemic issues that confronts the healthcare system, the jury, I think, is still out on that. But Naza, is there anything else you want to add to what Sandra just said?
Yes, I think it's important to say that in fairness to the university, that it entered into an agreement to establish a clinical nursing program, training program, back in 2011. And that agreement would have made provisions for the university to do a number of things. That this was signed in July 2011. It said that the university will finance the arrangement, that the university will have responsibility to contribute to all the equipment, supplies, salaries, travel, administration, and so that the hospital will need for that. The contribution will be exclusive to the CTP. It made provisions for the doctors to work at the hospital at no cost, and to train people. All of this was set out in an agreement in 2011. Up to now, nothing has been done. So you can't blame the university really for the failure on the part of the government to introduce the clinical teaching program. The other thing I want to just say very quickly is that one of the point was raised about transparency and the implications of this agreement for the country as a whole, and one of the concerns is that whereas the university can say, before the government does anything to change this agreement, they must come to the government. That's what the dispute resolution provisions provide for in Article 17. They must come to the university and get the university's agreement. Otherwise, they can't change anything. Whereas the university does not have to have any conversation with the government, really, to decide whether to sell or not to sell. So, let's say a buyer comes to the university and say, we want to buy the university, and but we're not going to continue the veterinary school, for example. The government will have no say in that decision. They just know that the school will not, the vet school will not continue. So it is a lopsided kind of arrangement, and there is a concern that the government really has no say, no involvement, no participation. There is no suggestion that the agreement that the university will sign with somebody to transfer ownership has to be looked at by the government ahead of time, and any suggestions or recommendations made to how this is going to impact on the country's future, which is the point I think Sandra is also getting at. How is it going to impact? What would it mean? And there is no such arrangement for the government to have any say whatsoever. And that too is quite significant.
Absolutely. Let's look at a comment here from Sandra Davis. She's saying there is serious political dimension to all of this. Keith, the Prime Minister, is willing to make himself and the country a victim now to become the victor in the long term. He's aware of the relationship between SGU and other national stakeholders, and so is willing to compromise the well-being of Grenadians for his political ends. When he's gone, it's no more Grenada will breathe again. Let's see. Bob is saying at the end of the day, SGU would look out for SGU, and it behooves the government to look out for Grenada. I have done my research on this matter. Your thoughts on these two comments here, lady and gentlemen?
Well, at the end of the day, SGU would look out for SGU. That is beyond doubt. I mean, remember, this is a private, private company in the sense that it has shareholders. It is run for profit. It's a profit organization. And those who are investing in it are doing so because they believe that their returns on investment is going to be good. They are not there thinking about what would happen to Grenada as such. You know, I believe in fairness to Dr. Modica. When he entered into this arrangement with Sir Eric Gary back then, he showed an interest in the country. And throughout his involvement at the level of control, he clearly had Grenada's interests at heart and had certain conversations with the government and did certain things that demonstrated clearly that he was interested in making sure that Grenada got something out of this experience. But I think the situation has changed. And this is a publicly traded company where people are investing in it and are looking for their money. So it's not driven by the same terms and the same imperatives as they were back then. So I think, that observation is totally correct.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a question here from Nigel Graves, Andy. I'm curious at the extent to which this new arrangement is compliant with Grenada's obligations in the context of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Are there any implications for giving like treatment to regional investors?
It's a great question. And I am not quite sure whether that is so, you see, because the reality is all of these governments are making special concessions to the investors, and they take advantage of the fact that people are competing with each other and that investors understand that given the challenges for revenues, countries are saying, investors are saying, if you don't want to give me this concession, I'll just go to St. Lucia. Or if you don't want to give me this concession, I'll just go to St. Vincent. So they are able to play off one country against the other. And because we are not insisting everybody on the same standard, the investors are the ones who benefit in the end. But very, very important consideration there.
Sandra, is that something that you considered as well? Or is that something you will take on board based on the question from that viewer?
Well, I think Mr. Burke is more competent than me to answer that. But there is something that we must also note. For all of these investors, and I don't know how many of these investors might have also come in via citizenship by investment. As citizens of Grenada, they are CARICOM citizens, So that gives them the right of establishment in other CARICOM countries as well. So while some of our genuine persons from the rest of the region and we locals face great challenges, they can run over it. The other comment I would like to make, again, looking at the situation has changed and the comments about the founder. Grenada took a chance on the founders of SGU. And yes, they and I already referred to what I described as sentimental, okay? But in terms of how our government treats, you know, with dealing with this matter, again, I refer to the press conference that happened on Thursday. Was it Thursday? This week.
Yeah,
you know,
Thursday,
we are going to have a press conference where SGU will announce its initiatives for Grenada. Now, we would think, you know, okay, there has been a significant event, and we will also hear how the government and SGU have negotiated and what is the consensus that they have come to. You know, but again, it is this charity case, you know, this charity case. And then in the agreements, we waive all our sovereign rights.
All right, and then we have another comment here from Prince Thomas. He's saying, ask the political leader of the NDC if he has any of his citizenship by investment clients who invested in SGU. Or you open a sweet can of worms. That question will be posted, actually. We do have some questions for the political leader of the NDC when he comes back on the Bubb Report. And I'm telegraphing this now with respect to his political economy interests in the corporate sector. And these questions need to be asked as well. So very valid point there. So ladies and gentlemen, we want to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will get some final comments from all of you. Please stand by.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
You know, we love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? And folks, welcome back. We want to conclude this conversation now with Mr. Burke, Nazim Burke, and Sandra Ferguson. As a reminder, we did invite the St. George's University to appear on the program today. We did not get a response from their public relations person. We also invited the Honorable Anthony Boson. He was a former Minister of Finance in Grenada, and he also spoke on this issue in Parliament as well on several occasions, and himself being a part of a previous amendment to the SGU Act that was put in force back in the late 70s. So Mr. Burke and Ms. Ferguson, I would bring you guys back to get some closing comments. So Sandra, I would start with you.
Well, you know, this transaction and the path, the trajectory of SGU, we need to see it also in the context of the blue economy. Now, we did not talk about whether or not, in fact, SGU is also considered a tourism facility, because somewhere around 2013, 2014, I can't remember the exact language now, but education and tourism went together. So what other incentives and exemptions it may be enjoying as a result of that? Now, in the context of the blue growth, the blue economy, which we really don't know nothing about. We have since seen a couple of documents, and most of the country really is not onto that discussion. But one of the blue growth centers of excellence was science and technology, and it says this area. So an area apparently has been allocated for the for the establishment of this center. It notes their proximity to the St. George's University and high-tech knowledge corridor for new international ventures and services in concert with the proposed new Google partnership. Now, you may recall that at the press conference, the Chancellor referred to making Grenada the an IT center and establishing partnerships with new and small
companies in the US. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. And the health science and technology zone. Mm-hmm. Okay. And among other things they had here was St. George's University, pharmaceutical and biomedical, medical ICT, medical manufacturing, National Teaching Hospital, medical tourism, wellness center. Now there is another development in terms of the hospital that is happening in the Mount Hartman. Are these things related? These are questions that we have to continue to explore and ask so that we, the citizens of the country, know what is happening in our country. And not only what is happening, but where we stand in this picture. And I want to thank you very much, Kellon. And I just want to talk about the days I fondly remember you as that young, pioneering, investigative journalist. And there was a certain story that you did, and I hope you will pursue it to the end.
Sandra, you brought me back there. You brought me back to the days at Community Channel 6. But that story, I do remember what you talk about concerning oil and gas, that particular oil and gas agreement that I explored. And I do remember fondly how that ended up. But that would also be in my book that will be published next year. But rest assured, it is a story that I will be following up on. Yes. Mr. Burke, let me bring you back here, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to close, Kalon, on the concern about transparency generally. You know, the failure to involve the people of Grenada in some of the very important decisions that the government is making. And even after the agreements are entered into, the failure to have a discourse, have a national discourse on it. We saw it with the Grenlec situation, yeah? But in this particular transaction, there are so many questions which are left unanswered. The university has been sold. Who is the buyer? What is the value of the transaction? Why is the government being given a grant as distinct from imposing a tax, even at a lower rate, on the purchaser? If the purchaser is to pay 10%, why are we doing this at 3% instead of 10%? Why should the value of the transaction be decided only by the buyer and the seller without the government having any say at all in that? Whereas that's not the case otherwise. Does the government reserve the right to examine the agreement and to have any say at all in what will become, how it's going to impact on the country? These are things which I think the government ought to be concerned about at the time that it is entering into agreements of this kind. And we don't know. We are not criticizing anyone because we don't know if it was done. But the fact that the population does not know must be a source of great worry. And if there is one call that we would want to make out of all of this, is the need for transparency in government.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely, Mr. Burke, and we're hoping to have you back again. Both of you, Sandra, we were trying for months to get you here, but we were finally able to get you on the Bubb Report. So we're grateful to both of you. This is a story that we will be following up on because, of course, while the university does provide significant benefits to the country, this is not to say that we ought not to question, as Sandra said, ways in which transactions are conducted and how it benefits the people of the country. And these questions need to be asked. So I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for providing some good context. And again, the door is open for the government side to be represented on this issue, on this program, because it is an issue that we want to address again. So thank you again, and all the best to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you for your participation in the program today. There were lots of questions that we did not have an opportunity to get to, but we certainly thank you for your participation on the program. As a reminder, the Bubb Report is streamed and aired as a repeat broadcast in Grenada on the Grenada Broadcasting Network on Wednesdays at 5 p.m., also on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. on CRFM Radio. If you are a radio listener, if you are on Spotify, the Bubb Report is also there, in addition to our streaming on Facebook and YouTube. We are also on WPG 10 on Sundays from 8 p.m. So you can catch a repeat broadcast of this episode on Sunday, tonight actually, at 8 p.m. For those who are not on social media, because of course, as you know, social media does not carry the full weight of viewership in Grenada. So we thank you all for your continued viewership, listenership, and participation. And we will endeavor to do all that we can to ensure that we continue to bring you quality, balanced, objective, and well-researched journalism. I'm your host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. On behalf of the producers, I thank you for viewing and do have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.